So in this video, we're going to be looking at how to solve inequalities by multiplying and dividing. And you solve inequalities in the same way that you solve equations. So if you were presented with this first inequality, the first thing that you want to do, again, is to isolate the x. So you have to ask yourself, how do I get rid of 3 times x if I just want x by itself? So to get rid of 3 times x, you need to divide by 3. And if you divide the left-hand side by 3, you're going to divide the right-hand side by 3 as well. And then you'll be left with x on the left and then -2 on the right. And the only difference between this and an equation is that instead of an equal sign, in this case, you have an inequality. And then, of course, because it's an inequality, we're going to go and we're going to graph that. So we're going to graph x less than -2. So we're going to make our number line, put our -2, -1, -3, 0, and then because this is less than, we're going to use an open circle, and we're going to go anything less than -2. So let's look at the second example. So very similar, we have to isolate the x, and so how do we get rid of -2 times x? So if we want to just get x by itself, we need to divide by -2. And if I divide the left by -2, I'm going to divide the right by -2. But you have to be really careful when you're dividing or multiplying by negative numbers in an inequality. It changes the sign. So anytime you divide or multiply by a negative, the direction of the sign is going to change. So in this case, it was a greater than or equal to sign. It's going to become a less than or equal to sign. Then again, we're going to graph this inequality. So I'll make my number line. I'll put my numbers on. And again, I'm going to, in this case, I'm going to have a closed circle because it includes the 4. And then anything less than that, so my arrow will go to the left. Okay, so let's look at some examples that involve multiplying. And I can't get rid of that box right now, so we're just going to leave there. So how do I get rid of dividing by 2? Get rid of dividing by 2, I'm going to multiply both sides by 2. So on the left-hand side, these 2's are going to cancel. I'll be left with x is greater than 10. So all I have to do is multiply both sides by 2. And then again, I'm going to graph this inequality. So in this case, greater than 10, I'm going to have an open circle, and then anything greater than 10 is to the right. Now, how do I get rid of dividing by -3? So to get rid of dividing by -3, I'm going to multiply both sides by -3. Now, because I am multiplying by a negative, my direction of the sign is going to change. So again, those are going to cancel. I'll be left with x on the left, and what's going to happen now is was greater than is going to become less than or equal to, and I will end up with -12 because that was a -3. Then I'm going to graph that. Now, because it was less than or equal to, I'm going to have a closed circle, and anything less than means I'm going to the left. So again, I'm just solving an inequality the same way that I would solve an equation. So the steps that I would take to solve an equation, I do the exact same steps to solve an inequality. I show my work in the same way. The only difference with an inequality is when you're multiplying or dividing by a negative number, the direction of the inequality will change. So if it was less than, it will become greater than, and if it was greater than, it will become less than. So let's look at one more example. This one happens to have a fraction, so it's a little bit more complicated. And again, I'm going to try to, there we go. Okay, so remember, to get rid of multiplying, so this is -2/3 multiplied by x, I need to divide. So I need to divide both sides by, oops, I'm going to just undo that for a second because the negative got lost. I'm going to divide both sides by negative 2/3. That's not working very well. I'll just put it down here. I'm going to divide the left, and I'm going to divide the right by negative 2/3. Remember, when I divide by a fraction, all that that really means is that I'm multiplying by the reciprocal. So that's all I actually am doing. So I'm actually going to erase all of those things now. And just keep in mind that dividing by negative 2/3 means multiplying by the reciprocal. And if I multiply the left by negative 3/2, I'm going to multiply the right by negative 3/2. What happens on the left-hand side is everything cancels out, which is what I wanted. And I'm going to be left with just x. I've isolated the variable. On the right-hand side, it just so happens that these 2's will cancel. I'm going to be left with negative 3. Now, because I was multiplying by a negative, the direction of the sign is going to change. So that will become my answer. Then the final step that I have to do is I have to graph my solution. Because this has a greater than and not a greater than or equal to, I'm going to use an open circle, and greater than means that I'm moving to the right. So that is how I solve inequalities with multiplying and dividing.